do is to have a lovely conversation about any questions or comments. I also want to talk about resistances and failure a little bit. And then I want to find out from you, for those of folks who are coming back tomorrow, what is it that you really need to hear? What are you missing that you would like, so I can make a list of that and we can address that tomorrow. So, my first question is, when you think about what we've talked about today, and this sense of this deep listening practice, the missional imagination, one-to-one conversations, getting to know your community both within and out the church, without the church at a deeper level, and then developing a kind of lean startup approach. What resistances come up for you? Because in any change, there's always an equal resistance, isn't there? And it's really important for us to name those resistances so that we, you don't ask people to do something that's really going to get them in the deep dive of resistance, because that's all you're dealing with then. So let's talk about resistances.
Fear of judgment.
Fear of judgment. So how does that work? Say more about fear of judgment.
So if I do get to a place where I'm talking to people about church, for whom church is a bad word, so then I'm very reticent about sharing with them. And yet I'm really excited about my experiences. So that's where my resistance is, kind of like this push-pull.
Okay, so let's help with that resistance right now. So if you're imagining in your head that you're going out and you're doing these one-to-one conversations, and you're doing it with people who are spiritual but not religious, what would be a way to enter into those conversations that does not meet that resistance?
Well, I think because I've experienced that.
I was going to have people use the mic.
Okay, great.
You can hear them.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, because I've experienced that, what I've learned is that when I get that resistance come up, part of the reason is I would have to say I had a bit of an agenda, right? Because I wanted to share that information. It was important to me. And I realized that if I wanted to diffuse that, I needed to listen and ask questions. And by listening and asking questions, I would find out where that came from. And then maybe then I could have more of a conversation. Or actually I'm experiencing it right now with some really close friends of mine, and I'm just dripping. Just every once in a while having a conversation. But I believe it was partially because I was excited, I wanted to share, and I wasn't received the way I wanted, but then I wasn't listening to them. It was what I wanted. So.
Yeah, I've done that a lot too. So what makes the one-to-one different? It is that aspect that we're listening. And the other piece to that is, like when Trey does these relational meetings, I mean, his thing is, I want to get to know the community. And, you could even say, we haven't done a really good job as a church community to get to know the community. We're trying to do that now. And there's no bait and switch here. I'm not trying to get you to come to church. I just really want to get to know your thoughts and feelings about this neighborhood, and I want to get to know you better. So just, meet it head on.
I think one resistance that we get from within the congregation is...
Kathy, just hang on a bit. It's hard to hear.
I think one resistance that we get is that a lot of our congregation members are already doing a lot of volunteering and they're burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you're going to ask them to do more by going out and doing one-to-one meetings or reaching out, I think there's a resistance there.
Oh boy, thank you for sharing that. That is so out there, isn't it? So what would it be for us to let go of something? For us to say yes to this? That's a tough one. And maybe, just maybe, what you want to do with this is you want to find one or two other people and that's it. And you're looking for the bright-eyed people. You're looking for those folks in your congregation that always are up for the next great idea. Like you could have a great idea party and those are the folks that show up. Right? And so there's energy around the great idea. So could we experiment with this next great idea and see what happens?
Good idea.
Right? Yeah, back there.
Just to connect with that, or continue on that same issue of the fact that a lot of people volunteer. I do a lot of volunteering. I have exactly that issue, which is that I am on committees all over the place. So what I'm saying is I will have that conversation. I won't be looking for other people. I'll be looking to have a 2-minute conversation with the people at those committee meetings. Say afterwards, everybody's getting up, but you'll have so what's your life like kind of conversation with them there. So you're not searching out other people. They're in your life in some way.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, you could develop a season of listening and make it really simple. It'll be a practice this month that after every committee meeting, we're going to enter into 20 minutes of one-to-one conversation and see how that works for us.
People have such different gifts, and I think part of it is presenting it in a way to people, or to a congregation for people who enjoy meeting other people, who have that sense of hospitality, and they may not actually be busy with other committees, or they may be on a committee, but this would really energize them.
Exactly.
So it's looking for the people type that seems to be.
Yeah, so you want to look for those folks that can listen well, that have a little bit of that, they like to get to know new people, but that won't overtake a conversation at the same time. Yeah. And really, I don't know how big your churches are, but for any kind of change to stick, you need to hit 17%. So let's say you have a congregation of 100 people. That's 17 people. That's 17 people to make a shift in the culture. So if you need 17 people, if you start with 3, and then you start doing these one-to-one conversations, and then as all of us experienced here, wow, that was very pleasant. Wow, that is kind of what we could be about as a church. We could know people on that level. That wasn't so bad. And then you build this trust, and then you do that next experiment. And so you don't go for the big thing. You build capacity. You build the muscles that you need in order to do that next thing with what you're doing right now.
I think the biggest thing in most churches is that some people in a small group will try and change something without notifying the whole congregation. If the congregation knows beforehand what may be developing or may be going on, I think that's more helpful than trying to get it done without so many people knowing about it.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Jackie. You help remind me what I need to say up here. This is wonderful. So, that is a problem. That's a big problem. And this is how I see it playing out in the church. So there's these idea people in the church. They have the next great idea, and then they bring it to council. Oh, what happens when you bring it to council?
They run with it.
No, I mean, I want to say that thank God for council, and thank God, seriously, for the committed people that care deeply about the church and that do that work. You know, do the number crunching work, do the trustee work, do all that kind of work. I mean, those are valuable people. And they kind of like, you know, they temper those new ideas, don't they? Well, what kind of, where's our money, you know? How about the people? They're always asking those questions. So one way to work around that is to go to council and say, I'd like to develop an innovation team. And for the next 18 months, I would like for you to bless this innovation team to run a couple of experiments, and in such a way that we don't have to go back and continue to ask you. So what is the chunk of money we can have? And if there's no money, that's fine, right? I mean, we can begin this process without money. So just give us some leeway, and in 18 months, we want to have, this innovation team wants to have a conversation with the council to see what have we discovered, right? A lot of times when we try to do this change work in the church, we take a good thing and we mess it up. So we take a worship service that's working perfectly fine with the people who are attending, and we mess it up. So my suggestion with this innovation team is, this is stuff that you work outside the church with. Like if you really want to connect with your neighborhood in a way, that has nothing to do with your worship service. Can we bless what is happening well in our churches and not get in there and mess it up? And then can we work along the side and run our experiments and be creative? And then in that way, again, it's light, but also it helps build momentum and it helps give us the data that we need in order to do that pivot to say, aha, this is it for us. Now, I probably messed with a bunch of pastors here that want to change the worship services.
Beth, thanks for all these great ideas and tools so that we can reach out and formulate some weird ideas ourselves. I think one of the things I'd also like to see us do in this broader church community is to celebrate the weirdness that's already going on. I think, I look around the room and there's a lot of innovation already happening in churches in Victoria. There's, the James Bay community stuff. We've heard from Henry about a growing community of young adults. Surprise, surprise. We have the Senior Joy Chorus, youth and young adults. Nothing to do with church, but connected to the expression of our faith and reaching out in the community. And there's lots more. I mean, we have the First Nations work in Central Center. We have the Shelter Kitchen. And I mean, these are just the ones I know of. And I think we need to do a better job of celebrating our experiments and learning and sharing our lessons beyond the congregation, even within the congregation, and saying, this is a new way of doing church, and you might like to know about this, and this is what we learned when we tried this, and we would do it differently next time. But I see a lot of this going on, really,
So are you suggesting something like an idea marked day of coming together and sharing not only what's worked but what hasn't?
Sure.
Mhm. Thank you. Maybe I don't know who that goes to, but that's a great idea.
Gail Miller?
We'll send it to Doug,
That's better, yes, Doug.
and he'll send it to Gail.
Okay, and somebody on break talked to me about failure. The fear of failure as resistance. Do you sense that one too? I think the question was, how do we convince our congregations that failure is good? I don't think we're going to do that. But I think we can set up systems in which that is the outcome of it. Because if we can set up a system where we're always assessing what we're doing, and that we make it a part of the system, then we'll learn really quickly to not be afraid of assessment. And we'll learn really quickly to not be afraid of failure, because we know that we assessed and we just didn't leave it as, oh my gosh, that was so embarrassing, that didn't work. And the people whose great idea it was, they kind of crawl under a rock for the next 6 months, and then maybe show their head again, hoping that people have forgotten about it, right? But if we can set up this system that we're going to assess everything, then failure becomes much more of an option.
I was just going to mention that sometimes people are actually afraid of success, because that means that that's more for the church in terms of money, time, and everything else. And so your experiment maybe has to have self-sustainability as a part of it. I often remember school boards, for example, didn't want to take federal money because they knew very well that in 5 years they were going to have to pay for it because it was a good idea and people were benefiting. So, we still have underneath all of this bumps in the pew and money. And sometimes things do, when they get going, do require funding.
Yeah, it's funding, it's time and energy,
Yeah,
it's
almost.
we're burned out. It's time for that next generation. Where are they? They're not here. We're doing such great work. And we can't do one more thing. And all that is legitimate. And there's a shift, and I don't know exactly how it happens, but this shift from that scarcity into a sense of abundance, and into a sense of, when we run these experiments, we realize that we have many more partners than we thought. And that if we can actually look outside the doors of our church, we have many more people that want to be a part of what we're doing. Maybe they're not going to come to worship on Sunday morning, but they really want to be a part of the realm of God. And for them, that is church.
Two words around that become barriers, I think. We can really like what we're doing, like we're really, really, really excellent fundraisers where I come from. Like, we're good and we like it. And so paying for what we do is a great source of community and a great source of joy for us. And it helps us, both the church organization and the people
who are involved in the fundraising. So the fear of loss is like, it's huge, because these fundraisers are the life's purpose. They're the reason they get up in the morning so that they can plan the next department that's going to be added, or, you know. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, a second fear for me is, what if we try ideas and they're not radical enough, and they don't get you, like, is it good to get to what's going to emerge kind of one small step at a time? You know, like, what's the difference between tinkering with something and really being innovative? And if we tinker too much, we just waste our time and waste lots else. We waste the future. But if nobody will move to the innovation, is tinkering okay? So, like, there's a fear about doing too much, the fear of not doing enough. Like,
Yeah, what I'm hearing underneath that, Cheryl, is this sense of really not being clear on what does God desire. So if we focused on why are we here? What is our ultimate purpose? What does God desire? What's God's preferred future for our community of faith? Maybe that would begin to shift and to help people see, well, maybe the annual bazaar that brings in X amount of money, though it's been a good community and a reason for being, maybe we can loosen that up and contemplate another reason for being as well. And maybe that reason for being can gain some legs. And I hear what you're saying about that tinkering and experimenting, and I think that just has to do with discernment and following that path of, is this the path of that following God's desire? That's all I have for you right now.
What concerns me was when you said 2050. And I'm thinking of not only our congregation, but others I've been involved in. And one thing you have to do, it's mandatory, is the congregation has to know what's going on. And quite often we will do certain activities, and by the time it gets back to you, you set a group off to do X, and it gets back to you, and it's all askew because Mabel has spoken to Susan, and Susan's talking to Fred, and you know the church. I can't think of the word. Yeah, grapevine. And right from the outset, if this message is not passed to them properly and precisely, and I think that's a good intro, was 2050. It's a bad, you don't want it to happen, but if people can see that and actually understand what it's about, then I think you'll have some, more people will get on board and will support it.
You know, there's many different senses of urgency, and they say in any kind of change process, you need a sense of urgency. And if that is not compelling, nobody's going to change, because why change? Who wants to change? I don't want to change. I want other people to change, but I don't want to change. So you are underlying one of the senses of urgency, which is, hey, if we don't jump right now and experiment, there's not going to be anything left. That's one sense of urgency. It might be a starting point, but I hope that that's not our ending point. Because I think that's what gets around the Cheryl thing too, is that is it about church survival? Or is it about following God's preferred future for our time and in our place and in this context?
There are a couple of themes that I've heard. Rest in peace 2050, church as we know it. I believe that's accurate. The church as we know it today will not exist in 2050. The other thing I heard you say is, if it's not broken, don't tinker with it. So we've got existing Sunday services that meet the needs of the folks that are there. I don't think we need to change that much. Maybe incrementally, maybe a little more modern music. But what you're asking us to do, I think, is we need to reimagine what the future looks like. And we need to experiment and get out there and let's discover what church will be like in 2050. And we need to sow the seeds for that now. Is that?
Yeah, you said it. You said it a lot more succinctly than I have in the past.
I was just going to say, you said it better than I did.
I have a question about fear, but I'm trying to address not the fear of the members of the congregation, but the fear of the people outside who have left the church, who are afraid of the church. And there are a lot of people who are very afraid of a church as an institution. And I don't know I do know what's happening in Victoria a little bit, is that there's a big question about why is the government funding the church? Why aren't we paying taxes? What is this church doing? It's a social group. So what is that fear of the institution, of the church, and how do we address, and is that a matter of perhaps doing a better job of advertising what we do? I'm not sure. But I do believe that that fear is a fear that we need to be afraid of.
Well, it is endemic in a green value system that skepticism bubbles up, and skepticism of all institution, and the church is one of those. I mean, we're skeptical about government, we're skeptical about any kind of institution. So that's just the sea that we swim in. I do think that we are a really well-kept secret. I think that we do so much in our communities, and it's just like that's our norm state. We don't even think that there's anything special about it. But oh my gosh, it's so beautiful and special. So how do we get the word out there? How do we brand ourselves in the 21st century? I think that's an important question to wrestle with.
So I know that we're not all on the same page here, and we're all different colors, but I feel like we miss the boat if we're thinking 2050 for one. I think 5 years.
Yeah.
And a much larger looming fear for me and thing that I'm concerned about, not losing church as I know it, but that the church is a gift to our communities, and we have looming changes in our climate and our environment, whether you agree with it or not, that are going to create chaos in just a few years. If not here, it's happening all over the place right now in other countries, but it will impact us here in many ways that we don't know what that will look like. But our churches have the ability to respond to that by those relational kinds of conversations that we have not been having. We have been in our ivory towers for too long, and we haven't had relational, some of us have, but it hasn't been back and forth.
It hasn't been a part of our practice.
It hasn't been part of our practice. But I really hope, my hope for the church is that we can begin them right now and not only feel urgency, but urgency like in a huge way to realize the gift of community building that churches have right here in how we serve food, in how we Funville is how we bring people together. And it doesn't have to be about the congregations on Sunday mornings. It can be other things. We just need to realize that gift and the urgency.
Yeah, and I would also add the gift of worship and the gift of Bible study and prayer, and how you don't even realize through that practice how we are shaped and formed in the ways of love that runs counter to the culture in which we find ourselves. And what a gift to the community. So that blue value meme that gives us that kind of shaping and forming, we don't want to throw that out. We just want to bring it up to the 21st century, right? It's transcend and include. So how do we bring the best of that value meme into the 21st century and contextualize it in a way that it's a delicious fragrance for our communities? Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to the comments about the value that the church brings. So you may have heard of the HALO project, and I think we have the opportunity as congregations here in Victoria, that's across the province, to take advantage of having HALO studies done in our congregation. It's a study that started in the States initially by some economists. I think it's the University of Waterford Guelph that are doing it now. And what they've discovered is that churches add significant value to the communities that they're in. And the factor of anywhere between about 3.5 to 7 times the value of their annual budget is added to the community. So Google HALO project and you'll find all of that.
I never knew that. That's awesome. Thank you. So what I'd like to know now is, what do you want to see happen tomorrow as we gather? What do you need?
You want to start off with saying what you've got planned, and then...
Okay, so what I have planned is that we are going to take this Lean Startup Canvas, and we're going to work in groups, and we're going to kind of workshop this out so that you know how this works. It might be something that you could actually take back to your congregations. Okay? I'm going to give you this, and then I'm going to give you another sheet of paper. I don't know if you can read that. Let me read some of the things. What's the vision for this change? What's the importance of it? How are you going to measure it? Who's affected? Where will we find our support? It's just another way of having the conversation around the table if you find the canvas not helpful or an addition to the canvas. Okay? So that's what I have planned, that we're going to do that, and I'll be coming around to tables and kind of helping you out. But if there's something else that you're like, geez, I wish she would have talked about this and she didn't. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question, maybe.
People can't hear you over there.
It may not be worth hearing. I've always been trying to figure out in this sea of change that we're in, and trying to find innovative projects and whatnot. Are you finding where you see this happening, these projects are more ministry driven or congregational driven? Like, has that whole thing shifted? Like I have always seen the United Church pretty much as a grassroots church, and but I think that's changing, and I'm not sure though.
That's a really good question. I think you need a core of bright-eyed people. I think that if you're going to do it within a church context, the pastoral team needs to be on board and be supportive. And if you don't have that, it's not going to work. So I think that we need those pastors to be high-capacity leaders, and to have the humility to say, I trust you, and I'm rooting for you, and I'm supporting you, and I'm there, and I have your back, and we're in this together.
This is more a desire for the worship service, because I think it might fit there, and it relates to Janet's comment. Can we have, as part of the worship service, some way of reflecting on how our faith sustains us in times of rapid change? For me in particular, I've been reading Dermot O'Rourke's book, In the Beginning Was the Spirit, and the role of the Spirit in evolution. And as people of faith, can we draw on that tomorrow? Somehow?
So you're asking me to change my sermon right now?
Just add to the liturgy in some way, not necessarily your sermon, but somehow the liturgy, that we have some way of reflecting on how our faith sustains us and inspires us and gives us hope.
I might not be able to deliver on that one. But I will talk about it tomorrow afternoon, but I don't think I can do it I'm not going to change my sermon.
I'm wondering if there are any red flags. Really close? So I'm wondering tomorrow if there are any red flags. By that I mean, if we're in, sort of trying to shift and transform from a blue, but we're still, our roots are in blue, are there words or phrases that we might still be using that are blue phrases that are like a red flag to us if we're singing those in a hymn or if they're in a prayer? So I'm just wondering, are there any red flags that we could be watching for? Because I think words are really important, that would help us to avoid those and to try to shift to transcend that and move into the yellow.
Well, so this is what I have to say about that, is that we need to be able to honor the people who are in our congregations. And we need to be able to honor the value means of which they find themselves. And so, you're in dicey territory there. I don't know how you navigate that as pastors. I know that, we talk about the worship wars, and it's all about language. And a little bit about the container as well. So I would not want to take words of faith away from somebody who longs to hear those words spoken and have grown used to those words when they come to church. And on the other hand, I would want to create some avenues for people who don't find that language helpful. But if you are used to having that language in your worship and then take it away, I don't think that that's honoring the people who come to church. That's my personal thing. That's why I always think that, well, what are those add-ons? So if worship for you is working right now, and if it's working for 100 people showing up, and the language in that worship is working for those 100 people, why would you want to shift it? Because there will be 80 people next week. Well, there's 80 people, and I bet those 80 people are paying a good portion of what it costs to run that church. So that's why I'm suggesting starting new things alongside of. So we honor what we're currently doing, but we're experimenting with some new as well. And that new could be a simple house church, a dinner party, a salon, if you will. It could be, hey, we have a bunch of people that we know in this community that really engage in service work. Or, there's a lot of people that love to hike, and what would it be like to do a prayer hike? So there's so many ways that don't, again, cost a lot of money, that we can engage people beyond who come on Sunday morning into spiritual practice. right? And talking about navigating in these difficult times, I just started reading The Cloud of Unknowing. And in the beginning of that book, she talks about what was happening in the 14th century in England. And it was during the Black Plague. And it was a time when, this was before modern medicine. So they didn't even know how this plague was spread. But they talked about this black shilling. They feared the black shilling, which was a black spot in your armpit. It was the first sign of the Black Plague. And parents would leave their children. Husbands would leave their wives would leave their husbands. It was a time where somebody living in that period said, there is no longer compassion. Okay? It was a time in England where there was a 100-year war that lasted more than 100 years. It was a time when the Catholic Church was being very extravagant in how it spent its money and very greedy. And it was during that time that we get this rich history of contemplation and contemplatives like Julian of Norwich and a bunch of others that I can't name right now. And I think that I was sharing this with the clergy earlier this week. I think that our call right now, and I get this from Margaret Wheatley, she said that our call right now in this time is to be warriors for the human spirit. And I'm not using that word warrior in a combative kind of way. I'm using it in a way of like, what is that martial art? Tai Chi. In Tai Chi, what do you do when somebody's coming at you? You deflect, you pivot, Well, okay, maybe you're a Tai Chi guy. Aikido. Thank you, that's what it is. It's Aikido. It's Aikido. So, how do we build a cohort of people steeped in contemplative practice for times such as this? And again, if I were going to say what our value proposition is as a church as a whole, as a progressive church, it is that we can do that work and we can do it well. If we focus on that.
Beth, this question arises from the last question, which was a lot of talking ago. In fact, you just gave us a wonderful sermon. But the original question was about language. And I have a concern about branding and the brand name, Christian. Because I think it's been hijacked. And today when I drive down the Pat Bay Highway and I see the sign for a Christian school, the meaning of that is a school which preaches intolerance. How are we going to deal with this hijacking of our brand? Because that is the belief that is widely carried throughout the country.
Boy, that's a good question, of which I have not the answer to. But yeah, that's, some people say that what we need to do is we need to reclaim it. I'd like to reclaim it, and I think we reclaim that one conversation at a time. Are we done today? Yeah? Are you feeling good about what we're going to do tomorrow?
We have one more question.
Okay, one more?
Actually, this is just a comment. After my earlier suggestion that we share information about our weirdness, Henry ran right up to his office and brought back a set of newsletters that are hot off the press. So if you would like some more information about the contemplative practices at this ministry, there's a stack.
And I think Mark has some announcements, and I'm going to do a shameless plug for my book, frankly, because I don't want to take them back. So if you know some your local church that might enjoy reading it, please consider buying a book so I don't have to take them back to the States.
As was alluded to, Beth will be here in worship tomorrow. That starts at 10. She'll be offering the reflection message time, unedited or unrevised. We can assure you that that notion of how we are grounded in our faith in the midst of that is always the theme that runs through our worship. So I'll trust that you'll find that present in the things we do. What would be helpful as we end our time here is if some folks could be around to move tables back into the hall, and a few others would stay in this space to help us put some chairs back. So if you're able to do that, that would be awesome. And then tomorrow we meet again at 1 o'clock. We'll start in this space, but probably move into the hall into table groups as we go. So we hope that you'll join us for one or both of those things tomorrow. And again, a reminder that Beth's book's available and that we will be sending you out a link to both the videos as well as the PowerPoints, what you've seen. And you should get that probably in your email on Monday or so.